It is good to be virtually with you all again today. Today, as we heard from Deuteronomy, Moses said to the people of God, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet." Moses was going to die soon. His time with the people of God was going to end. And the people of God let fear guide them when they said to God, when they said to Moses about God, "If I hear the voice of the Lord my God any more, or ever again see this great fire, I will die." Out of fear, they distanced themselves from God. And so God made do with what they gave them. God said, "Okay, if you would like an intermediary, a go between, I will raise up for you a prophet like you, like Moses, from among your own people." God tells Moses, "I will put my words in the mouth of the prophet, who shall speak to the people everything that I command." I can't help hearing this and thinking about the many prophets that we have in our world today. The prophets from recent history and the prophets today, and the different ways we treat our prophets. Biblically, we can look to many prophets and find that they were not appreciated in their time. And historically, it is frequent that a prophet is despised while they are alive. And it isn't until after their death that they are lifted up, sometimes to the point of blamelessness. It is most clear to see this with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As we celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day this past month, I couldn't help but remember the ways that we treat and think about Dr. King now, and the ways that he was treated while he was alive. Because while Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was alive, he was despised by many, many people, especially white people, to the point that he was assassinated. King was looked down on, was targeted by the FBI. He was detested for a very long time. And yet, now when we celebrate him as a man who could do no wrong, one who calls us to service more than justice. Neither of these images of Dr. King are accurate, at least not fully accurate. And neither of them do justice to who he was or to the movement that he was a part of. It is easy when we lift up a leader and say that they were the ones who did everything, that Dr. King led the civil rights movement, that he was the one who did all of the organizing, and he did it perfectly by himself. That lets us off the hook. Because I don't know about you, but I certainly couldn't lead anything perfectly. If what they say about him is true, I have no hope of working for justice. I couldn't possibly do what he did. But that is just the thing. That's not all that there was about him. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The movement for civil rights was not the movement of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was the movement of a people, of Rosa Parks, of A. Philip Randolph, Stokely Carmichael, Bayard Rustin, Dorothy Foreman Cotton, Andrew Young, Walter Reuther. So many joined together for this work of liberation and justice. Last week, we talked about being teachers and cashiers and students and parents and people, fishers of justice, for justice. This week, the question becomes, how do you make it happen? What does it look like to do that? Having recognized that you are called, as Martin Luther King Jr. was called, as each of us are called. You are called as an individual, as part of St. Andrew's, as part of the community of Ames, in the state of Iowa, in the country of the United States, on this world we inhabit. What does it look like to be a prophet raised up from among your own people? What does it look like to raise up prophets from among you? In our reading from Corinthians, Paul talks about food. And as a vegetarian, I'm all for his endorsement of vegetarianism. However, the reasons and the ways that he is talking about food are not quite connected to vegetarianism per se. It is more connected to what we hear in the first verse. Paul says, "Now concerning food sacrificed to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge." Then he goes on to say, "Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up." As Paul talks about our relationship to food, he talks about the complications of people who have different understandings of what it means to eat food sacrificed to idols. For Paul, he knows that idols are not God. They are not gods themselves. And so eating that food doesn't make a difference one way or the other. But not everybody has gotten to that place in their faith. And so Paul talks about not eating meat for the sake of others. So that, Paul says, I may not cause one of them to fall. This is the work of justice. This is the work of prophets in our communities. Our work is to not make another one fall. Not only that, but to help another one up. To together work for the justice that leads to peace. To be peacemakers in our community. To think with Dr. King, with the saints, the prophets that have gone before us, the prophets who today are lifted up, are sometimes despised, the prophets who guide us to deeper work for justice. And we are invited to ask of ourselves, as individuals, as a community, what does it look like to be a prophet for a community from among our own people? How do we follow God in these ways? Sometimes the care that we show for others in the community is easy. It's wearing masks. It's making sure that everyone has access to good protective equipment. It's advocating. It's providing food. for all who are hungry, making sure that no one spends a night like last night, cold, without shelter, without support. It is through this community of St. Andrew's that you all get the chance to be prophets for Ames and in Ames, and to recognize the prophets already at work in Ames, to follow the prophets among you, to care for each other as you do in the passing of the peace each week, finding a new person to connect with, and to extend that beyond your congregation to the wider Ames community, to think about what it might be like to be prophets with Ames, to do the work of justice with the community of Ames. Where is God calling you into larger community, out into the world? In this time of virtual gatherings, there are many opportunities to support, to affirm, even as it's hard. But this work that God calls us to, this ministry, this prophetic ministry, is also the ministry of love, is an invitation to care for others, trusting that they also are called to care for you. That together, when we care for others, the whole community, all those in need, receive the care, the love, and the justice of God. Thanks be to God.